people, my students used to say, can I record the lecture? I said, you can record it, but you can never show it.
Never show. Oh, we get so many people who tell us that. Just don't tell me it's happening. I don't want to know. Other people can watch it, but not me. I think there was a study done about why people don't like to, especially listen to their own voice, not just see themselves, but the voice thing is apparently
Because
real.
you hear your voice through
Yeah,
ears, and you
it doesn't sound like what you think.
My mother used to say that, or my sister and like as soon as we got on the phone, she could tell us.
I have a little bit of cold right now, so I don't normally sound like this, but I just feel peppy and happy and da-da-da-da-da. And whenever I hear myself, I'm like, oh no, really?
Is that me? I didn't I forgot that. Oh.
It's all right, we can also mute
That's all right.
Just really quickly here. Okay, that should work. Maybe.
Wait, why is this? Do I have an extra slide? Let me see. 1, 2. No, there they are.
Sometimes I think it's real sensitive, and if you like press it in the wrong way, it just do it once, you know?
Yeah. All right. Who is this?
We got 2 people online.
Well, I have some friends I told about, so I'm hoping they'll. I guess I should shut my phone off. No, I should shut it off. Yeah, I should shut it off.
I'm gonna pull out my notes just so I can make sure that.
Well, don't give me too big an introduction. I hate that.
Pardon?
How are you going to introduce me?
I was going to introduce you according to your bio, which was Professor Emerita and former chair of the Food Nutrition Department.
Yes.
Is that
fine.
correct?
That's fine. And I'm retired now. So that's good.
And I'm also just going to quickly, thanks folks for being here. Thank our sponsors, invite them to forthcoming lectures, and then turn it over to you.
This art is incredible.
Isn't it? These are the students. They used to paint their art every year in
Some of them are quite surprising, and then you look at the age and like age-wise, they're surprising. My friend whose grandson is 4, you should see him. He really died. And I'm like, whoa.
things, because we don't often always have permission
Yeah.
because of the factors that I mentioned before. So we always say you can stream it, but we don't know until after the fact that you can record it. And sometimes the presenters often even the day of change their mind for or against recording. So we try not to advertise it because we want to give people clear expectations about what they're going to do.
That is good.
Now, where would they put these would just be
Wow.
up in?
Well, that's what you're gonna learn about tonight.
Okay.
I have lots of pictures. Yeah, and there's a lot of, yeah.
See, I tend to do that. I annoy my son because we'll be watching a movie and, you know, maybe he's seen it. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Inception. And I'm gonna use like everybody or other kid. I got it and then I asked him a question. At one point he's like, would you just watch?
Right.
Because like it happened like, you know, I was like, why? And then it was something like I sensed that would happen or something.
You're not leaving, are you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Saw the two posters.
I saw this poster, I saw one poster.
We're out of here.
I have a World,
No,
I
we're
have a
gonna get
World
to
War
it.
II one.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a couple of them too.
I have it's a wonderful colorful one, it is Santa Claus in the sleigh, and he's throwing out war bombs. It's really, it's so, it's just a great,
Wonderful. And what happened here is we learned that this is what they usually, these were the first ones like this. And
then they got them.
graphic artists,
Yeah.
artists decided to have to do that.
Right.
They're beautiful, absolutely.
I also have one World War One. It's a big, the woman,
Columbia?
yeah, and then all the names down the side. I got a beautiful copy of that. Plus the unfortunate thing that.
Well, that's, I was thinking, well, he might have, if you think you could frame this children to college.
We do have some folks online.
Good.
7 people stopped by, 5 currently on there. So.
Don't show the seats.
Okay, I will. Well,
I'm gonna tell them we're thousands of people.
all right. And it is
I was
7
actually
o'clock.
gonna
Are you
ask
ready
you
to,
that, like they can't see
Well,
out
what's
here,
those
can
people I
they?
think went to the band.
Oh, they did? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We can give them a couple minutes. That's
Yeah,
fine.
they, since it is 2/3 of our audience.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I thought she said something about going to get a book, so I wasn't sure if they were going to
okay.
stay, but if they're going to rest of the weekend.
No, I didn't know, they may have been.
I didn't know if they were here for the art or if they were here for the lecture.
And she said she's a
Oh,
poster.
she left your bags.
Yeah,
Oh,
she's a
great.
poster collector. She has.
Oh, excellent. Well, they're probably here for the lecture, but let's give them a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were looking at the art, and then I did the art, so I was just getting the posters, and he was joking, he said, oh, we looked at the posters, now we're leaving. But I saw their bags too, so I'm like, oh, they're coming back.
Got 10 people online.
Good. Okay.
I won't start without them, but I don't want to leave our online audience
Right,
too long,
right.
too, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you could start. I don't,
Then we give them another minute, maybe
okay.
2 minutes late.
We could just tell them to cram me into the room and they don't want.
You want to preserve your space. So just don't forget, if you wouldn't mind, if there are folks who are asking any questions in the room, just to repeat the question first before you
Sure.
answer it. And I'll do my intro with this and then leave it with you, just in case you
Okay, and
wanna
what
go
about if they,
else.
when they ask questions online, how does that happen?
I'll read them out to you.
Okay, great.
And we'll usually, do you prefer to take the questions after the
After,
lecture?
yeah.
Okay, great. That's what I was gonna say, and then I thought, well, I should double check that.
Yes, no, definitely. Once I'm on them. And if you think I'm talking too fast, just go like this.
I do that too, all the
Yeah.
time. All right.
Okay, let's start.
Let's go ahead and get things started. Let me just swap my view on mine. cheat sheet here. All right, welcome everybody in the room and at home. My name is Lara Vilomat, she and hers. I am the head of outreach and community experience here at the Framingham Public Library. And we are so thrilled that you are able to join us tonight for the start of our Lifelong Learning Lecture Series. Tonight we are so thrilled to present Janet Schwartz. She is the Professor Emerita at FSU and the former chair of the, I want to make sure I get this right, the Food and Nutrition Department at Framingham State University. Tonight, she is going to be talking about Back to the Future, food conservation posters in the United States from 1917 to 1918. She's got some really great examples to share with us tonight as well. A few quick announcements for those of you in the room. We do have refreshments in the back. Please feel free to help yourselves to those. And we do ask that you take this opportunity to go ahead and silence your cell phones, ringers, alarms, anything like that. Please go ahead and turn those off for us. This, as I mentioned, is a Lifelong Learning Lecture Series, which is in partnership with the Framingham State University. And thank you so much to our sponsors also, the Joseph L. and Ray L. Front Foundation, courtesy of Elizabeth Fideler. And of course, thanks to the Friends of the Framingham Public Library, without whom none of these lectures would be possible. Our next lecture is going to be on Thursday, October 5th, and we're excited to present Liz Fideler. She's going to be talking about Blanche Ames and Oakes Ames, cultivating that mutual ground. So we would love to have you join us either online or here in person. And we do have snacks here in person, so do stop by if you can. And thank you so much to Professor Schwartz for being here tonight. Welcome.
Thanks. That's on. Hi, and thank you for coming tonight. This is the second time I've been doing this. Last time I did it, it was raining and people didn't show up. Now we have Zoom. Thank you. Thank you. This has been my life obsession, so I'm very happy to be able to share it with you. It's a very interesting time in our history, but also in nutrition history and food education history. Currently, the food is the largest category of material in municipal landfills, and this is important because it releases methane. While it's only 14%, it's important because we can control it. We can change that very easily by conserving food. But let's step back in history and look at food conservation 100 years ago. It was patriotic at that time to conserve food. Every aspect of the food system, every state, every community was focused on reducing food. This is my dining room. Yeah, so when I told you that I had a lot of posters, I meant it. I was joking, and my husband actually worked with the framer, and we think we put him through college, his kids through college, because we invested a lot in it. I probably have about 50 of them, and they come in all sizes. So I'll be showing you a number of posters. But this is obviously a weird kind of perspective because I tried to get a pano view photograph of it. In 2017, the Library of Congress did a wonderful exhibit in Washington, D.C. about posters, not just posters about food, but all the posters in World War I. This is the way they got the word out. And if anybody wants it, I can get you the link and you can go look at their website. So let's start from the beginning and the beginning of the war, just to catch everybody up. World War I started in 1914. We did not get into it, we meaning America did not get into it until 1917, but we were involved. Officially, we were neutral, but we were sending food overseas. President Wilson was a Southerner, and he saw what war did to his communities, and he didn't want to do that to anybody. He didn't want to get involved in that. So he was really not for getting into the war. He was fighting it. Then the Lusitania was sunk by German boats, and there was a lot of uproar about that. And then the Germans said they wouldn't use these submarines, and then they started doing it again. And the geographic area where this was happening is in the southwest part of the seas, southwest of Ireland. And I'll explain why. So Wilson had a problem. He was trying to first telling people we don't want to get into the war, and then he had to do a U-turn, and in a very short period of time, he had to tell people we want to get into the war. So he had to convince them to get involved. This is what the farmland in Europe looked like. These are actual photographs. So there were no crops. All of the crops all the farmland turned into battlefields. That poster on the bottom left is an interesting poster. It was a photograph, and then it was colored in, and they wanted to appeal to women. That the women in America were sitting back and eating their bonbons, and I can show you a cartoon about that. While the women in France were actually the plow horses and, working the fields. So this message of wasting nothing was paramount. Ships that used to transport food were now being used by the war. So the whole global food system was interrupted, and we'll get into that when we talk about sugar. There was a very strong belief that food will win the war. The Germans didn't have food. They invaded Belgium and France, and any food that was coming from, the United States or any place else was coming for Belgium and northern France, was taken by the Germans. This is it. This is what I wanted to show you. So at first, United States was seen as Uncle Sam, as just watching the starvation happening in Europe. And when food did get through, this was Belgian relief. You can see Uncle Sam is being welcomed by the kids of Europe. This Belgian relief, it was an organization based in London, and guess who was the head of it? None other than Herbert Hoover. And I know we don't usually like him, but let me tell you, he did some really good work around this, and I'll get to that in a minute. But Hoover was seen as a neutral negotiator. He wasn't seen as, on either side of the war. So he was able to get food. They estimated that 7 million people were living in starvation at that time. The United States got into the war because the German submarines started bombing the ships again, and they said they wouldn't. And the United States was pretty torn, so there was a big fraction of people that didn't want to get in and a big fraction that did want to get in. So we got into the war, and he created what is known as the U.S. Food Administration. I think this is the only federal agency that had a tenure of 2 years. There was a very large group of people in Washington, staff people, but by 1920, they were all gone. First time a department actually got disrupted and was totally gone. You can see here that he was focusing on women. It was kind of funny. I can't Oh, yes. Issues appeal to women and declare they can greatly assist the nation by economy and cheerful observance of advice. So, I think I had a picture of Herbert. I wanted to get you to Herbert. There he is. Okay. Herbert Hoover was by training, he was a mining engineer. And he and his wife lived all over the world while he did work for different companies. At one point, he decided that he had made enough money and he wanted to dedicate himself to public service. And the Belgian food relief was his first major global stand in that. He believed that the Food Administration, the U.S. Food Administration, would all be volunteers, except for the staff in Washington. Everybody else was a volunteer, so he really pushed volunteerism. And the idea was that the information would be centralized from Washington, but all of the organization would be done by states. And it's a very interesting model, I think. So this is the mission of the U.S. Food Administration. This was my first poster, by the way. I can't remember where I got it. I think I got it at an antique fair, but I can't remember. This food administration was independent of all other departments in the government, and this is pretty radical language. Its mission was to maintain government power over the country's food systems. Now think about that. That's centralizing power. I also want you to think of what was happening in the world in 1917, 1918. The Bolsheviks revolution in Russia, and there was a lot of concern that the communists and the socialists were going to take over the United States. Mexico had a civil war that lasted 10 years around this time. The women were asking for the vote, and there was also incredible immigration happening in this country. So this was a very volatile time for this all to be happening. The Wilson actually called to arms, and this is important because it wasn't just citizens that he asked to save food. He asked pretty much every part of the food system to be on board. You might ask why railroads were in there. When food travels across state boundaries, it's covered by federal law. If the food was grown, sold, and eaten within a state, federal law has nothing to do with it. So the railroads were really important, especially for sugar. So there he is in one of my posters. The question of why posters? Well, guess what? No internet, no television. There was radio, but not a lot of households could afford radios. And in addition, a very large portion of the American people were illiterate. So they had to do something, which here it says, the billboard was something that caught even the most indifferent eye. So having them be so beautiful and big was important. They called it the Committee for Public Information. So the posters were not just used for the food. They used a lot of posters to do recruitment. That's Miss Columbia, by the way. She was from the late 1800s. She was a patriotic symbol of the United States, and Uncle Sam joined her, I think, around World War I. But this is just a total aside. But if you look at the one with Uncle Sam, there's a very young girl sitting on his lap with his arm around her. That probably would not happen, not be allowed in today's day and age. And he's kind of looking down. I can't figure it out. But anyway, that was to get people to buy war bonds. And I don't know if you can get this on the camera, but there's a wonderful book of all the posters. Well, not every one of them, but a lot of posters. And you can see, I'll just open up to any page. And they're quite beautiful in color and so forth. So you can, those people in the audience here can take a look at this if you'd want. The MFA also had a small exhibit of food posters as well during this time, about 100 years ago. I'm sorry, on the 100th anniversary. Okay, so the way it was organized was that as I said, there was a staff in Washington, and then in each state, they had what they called a food administrator. And this is usually an upstanding citizen who had a lot of money, prestige, notoriety. And that person was asked to organize people in his state. So in every state, there was a state librarian, and I'll explain that in a second. There were merchants, there were retail associations involved. The state land-grant universities were very much involved and with extension. There was a home economics director, so each state had these positions. Some of them were funded and some of them were not. People did it as a volunteer, which is kind of incredible. Also, I didn't mention that around 1915-14, Andrew Carnegie built libraries. He built about 3,500 libraries across the country. So that's where the librarian piece came in. When I was lucky enough to get a grant, and I went out to Stanford University, where the Hoover Institution is, and I was able to see the original documents. Some of the original artwork was great. But I was reading letters that people wrote in. It was really quite exciting. And every single denomination of all religions in the United States wanted in on the action. And if you think about it, the faith-based institutions is a great organizing tool, because once a week people came in, and they could talk to them. So they were very much involved. And the businesses were involved because the food businesses were very much involved. So the libraries, because of Carnegie, the libraries were a central community gathering place where they could have displays. The display on your left, I think, is so funny because it's so symmetrical. It's actually, a great, somebody's paid a lot of attention to do that. The middle picture is an inauguration of one of the Carnegie libraries. So the library became the community place to get information, to have displays, to have food demonstrations, to get the word out. Okay. Another community volunteer was what they called 4-Minute Men. Back in the second decade of the century, when people went to the movies, they had to change the reels. It wasn't just on one reel. And so there was 4 minutes between reels. And so volunteers would go into the theater and give a 4-minute presentation on how people should save food. I mean, they really thought of a lot of different ways of getting into the community. So they were called 4-Minute Men. These are retail stores and food stores, and when I tell you about food stores, I want you to think the Waltons, not Wegmans. Okay, so the very small stores, the retailers got involved, and that one on the right is a potato. I don't know if you can see it. It's so big it doesn't look like a potato, but that was a display in a grocer, and they wanted people to eat potatoes because they were pretty heavy to be able to ship overseas. There was a big effort to prevent hoarding and price increases, especially with sugar. People would, in fact, some of the letters that I read, there were neighbors telling on neighbors, I think that person next door to me has sugar in her basement, and so they would tell on their neighbors about hoarding sugar. So this was the pledge on the right, this is the pledge on the retailers not to sell to people with too much, fair prices. There was an organization called the Women's Committee on the Council of National Defense, and they started a campaign, and it was a pledge card. And it looked like it's like a big postcard. And you would sign this and send it into the federal government, and in exchange, you would get a home card. I have it here. This was the home card, and you were supposed to put it in your window to say that you were part of the program. But what's really interesting, I don't know if you can see it, there's a question here, do you employ a cook? So that tells you right away which segment of the population they were they were targeting there. But important for nutrition education, on the back of the home cards was the advice that they wanted you to follow as far as saving food. And you can see there that 14 million cards were sent in. So it was a good part of the population because they were households, not people. So this is the card. And I saw the original artwork. That was very exciting for me in California. So the back of the card had lots of good information. And they asked people to have one wheatless meal a day and one wheatless day a week. And I love this, that there was a meatless day, and it will be Tuesday. I don't know why it had to be Tuesday, but they decided that was what they were going to ask for. And if you can see, it says by meatless, we mean no red meat and no preserved meat. So that's beef, bacon, ham, and lard. And please remember that we really didn't have the vegetable oils that we have now. So all frying was done with lard. So porkless meat would be Saturday, so you couldn't have, well, it's not this, you couldn't have, this is what they were asking you to do. Salted pork, bacon, lard, or ham. And then to just reduce sugar. Sugar was a real problem. I'll talk about it. This was the beginning of nutrition science around this time, and so the protein, fat, and carbohydrates were kind of front and center. And if you notice there that just as today, we eat too much protein. So they said 80% of the protein that we eat for our bodies, we don't need. And they ate a lot of fat, and most of that was because they were frying in lard. They wanted the people to drink milk. They did not want people to cut back on the milk because they couldn't send the milk overseas, and it was a good source of protein, especially for children. And here's what they said about hoarding, which is kind of interesting, but I want you to look at the last sentence. It says, there is much insidious propaganda in this country against conservation. Well, just think about the language. If half of the country, let's say, was illiterate, another good portion would not be able to read insidious propaganda. That's very high language skills. So as I'm reading this thing, I said, who is this for? You know. So somebody else in the audience asked me about where were these posters hung. They were hung all over. On the left is the group at the land grant institution in New York, which was Cornell. And Martha Van Rensselaer was the head economist, home economist. And she was a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt's. And I went to Cornell, and the building that our school was in, we called it Martha Van. That was the nickname of the college. Well, anyway, so there she is, and there are some of the posters in the back. And the group on the right I think, yeah, Connecticut. This was University of Connecticut. And what they're doing there is they're developing recipes that would use less meat and use less wheat. That was the big thing. The colleges did a lot. They created curriculums. They created all of the supplementary material to show people what to do. Recipes galore. And I was actually looking at them yesterday, and I said, this would be good for people who don't want to eat gluten, you know, because they got rid of all the wheat. So let me get to the teacher part. This is a picture of local food demonstrations in Minnesota, and you can see the posters on the wall in there. And getting into the rural areas was kind of a challenge. And here you can see they created a horse and buggy to get into the rural areas, and these women would go in and teach. The messages were all over. So these are posters, but these were in trolley cars. Those of you who remember the old subways, they had the little posters on top. I just keep remembering Miss Reingold. That was the one in New York that I always thought was funny. But anyway, I have one of those here that I can show the people here. But just to show you how much it was involved in society, this is a times table for the Pennsylvania Railroad that went between New York City and Philadelphia. And the timetable had the messages about food printed on it. And when I was looking through newspapers, every single newspaper, if they had an extra space in the newspaper, and by the way, there were a lot more community and newspapers in that time than there are now, they always had some instruction about food. Some of these are, I wouldn't call them posters, I would call them billboards. These were very large. I have one, but I've never been able to, put it up because I don't have 20 feet of wall that I could dedicate to it. But you can see how large they are. And if those of you in the audience, I have the one with South Station. It's a photograph, and I can show that to you. I just couldn't the photograph didn't work in putting it into the slides. There's Union Station in Washington, D.C. with a very large banner, I would call it. And on the left, you see that was the posters that were put up in Times Square. So they really were all over. Pennsylvania did something really interesting. They created a conservation train. The man on the right was the state administrator for Pennsylvania, and that is Howard Hines. You may have heard of the Hines Food Corporation. So he had notoriety, so he volunteered to be the head in Pennsylvania. So what they did was they took a train and they retrofitted it. At that time, every little town had a train. That's how people got around. So they brought the train into these little towns and did their education programs there. I have lots of pictures of it, but this one, I think you can kind of get a feel for what it looked like. This was a lesson in they had a lot of displays, so this was a display on canning. I think it's kind of cool. So separate from the U.S. Food Administration was the National War Garden Commission, and this was a joint effort between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of the Interior. At the time, the Department of Interior had education under it. So they all got together and they created this, what they call Liberty Gardens. Victory Gardens are World War II. Liberty Gardens are World War I. The Women's Land Army, again, trying to get the women involved in growing food, and school gardens. So these posters are fabulous. There's Miss Columbia over there again. The Women's Food Land Army, that was actually taken, and Britain had that as well, and they kind of copied England in that. The poster on the left is smaller than the bigger posters that I have here, but it's a great one. I love the graphics for the school garden posters. They're incredibly beautiful, and they were. But now, if you know anything about printing, every time you add a color when you're doing printing, it costs more money, right? And takes more time. So look at the colors in this. So that's pretty amazing. Oh, to get the kids to participate in the school gardens, they had to change labor laws to allow kids to work. Here's some cartoony kind of posters for school gardens. You can see Uncle Sam as the Pied Piper. I like that one. But my favorite school garden one is this one on the right. I have it. It's just really beautiful, and they don't have a lot of. It's much more. It's much cleaner than this allows. When you take a picture of a poster, then enlarge it, it gets fuzzy, but it's not as fuzzy when you see it. Excuse me.
Are some of them already signed?
Yes, many of the question here was, are some of them signed? And the answer is yes.
Especially World War I, right?
Yes, very much so. I'll speak to that in a second. Here, they did a canning campaign. They wanted women to can food during the summer, and so they started a campaign for canning. And what's funny about the campaign for canning are the other slogans that they use. So, turn your reserves into preserves. I love that. And back up the cannon with the canner. So they were somebody had a sense of humor, I think. This one on the right I have, it's not a big one, but it is really very funny. I don't know if you can read it. It says, canned vegetables, fruit, and the Kaiser too. And you can see a picture of the Kaiser inside that glass bottle. Can you see him? And what you can't read, but I can see it on my poster, the label on the bottom underneath the sword says unsweetened. So that's a great one. So you can see the National War Garden Commission was in charge of all this canning stuff. This is kind of interesting. They had community canning centers. So it was another way to get everybody involved. I have a picture of it in the next slide. But I wanted to show this one to you because it was a cartoon with Hoover in there. And he says, don't can, we don't need waste. You have to use up everything you have so you don't have any waste. And you should be canning in the jars. It says there, these cans are absolutely useless. In New York City, this is interesting. The crates of food that were coming either in or out of New York City, if they had a bad piece of fruit or vegetable in it, they would throw out the whole case. So the New York City Canning and Drying Kitchen actually went and collected those cases. Again, they were trying not to waste food. Isn't that incredible? And they would use that. Here are two photographs of the community canning. The one on the left, I actually don't know where it is, but what's interesting is that canning requires a lot of fuel because you have to heat up the jars. And so this way, the cost of canning was shared by the community and it wasn't up to any individual person, which was great. There's a wonderful picture of women canning. I think it was in Louisiana, maybe? I'm sorry, no, Indianapolis. And the cartoon, this is the head of the the Garden Commission. His name was Park. Last name was Park, Charles Lathrop Park. Oh, Pack, not Park, Pack. And what's funny about this, he was trying to get everybody, in line to do what he said to do. But if you can see in the top left corner, it says enemy plotters. So the idea that the enemy was always there and watching you. Interesting. Okay, a little something about home. The Home Economics Association and the Dietetic Association were founded in the first part of the 20th century. And the leader among them, the idea was to take science and put it into the home. That's where domestic science came from. And many of us went to schools that no longer, they were called home economics, and then they became consumer sciences, and now we have the food and nutrition department. So it changed. But can you see what person is not like the other person in the photograph on the left? There's a woman named Helen Swallow Richards. She was the first female graduate in chemistry at MIT, and she was the first female instructor. And she ran her home like it was the Army. And she believed you take scientific principles and you apply it to the home. She was known for doing the first water quality tests, and she tested water from communities around Massachusetts. And I don't know if it's still there. My guess it's not. Well, I guess it's changed. But at MIT, there is a bronze bas-relief of Ellen Swallow Richards, and her breasts were nice and shiny because it was a belief among the students that if you rubbed her breasts before an exam, you would do well.
Can you just go back for a second? You said she was doing water testing?
Yes.
When you say water testing, you mean domestic potable water?
Yes, domestic potable water, and whether it had organisms in it or anything like that. The question was, what kind of water was she testing? She was very into the home and applying science to the home. That was her MO. And that's a picture of some women actually holding scientific instruments. Can you believe that? This again is University of Connecticut, and you can see the posters being hung there. This actually, in nutrition, you all take a number of food science courses, and this was the food science class at University of Connecticut. So the home economics division had a number of subdivisions, and you can see them on the left. And here the women, the students, were actually weighing all the measurements, and you can see the posters in the background. As I told you before, that they didn't want people to stop drinking milk, so there was a number of posters reminding people that milk was very important for their kids. I put this up here. These were pamphlets that were written, but I want you to look at the starred one. If there was ever anything I could say for nutrition education, this would be it. Spend at least as much for vegetables and fruits as you do for meat and fish. How's that for a dietary guideline? Every time someone says the vegetables are too expensive, I always say, no, they're not. It's your meat that's expensive. So they created these pamphlets for the general public. And this was a curriculum that was developed for colleges, not for public schools, but for colleges. And I just want to remind you that at this time, there were only 2 vitamins that were discovered. One was vitamin A, and one was vitamin B. One vitamin B. They didn't know about all the different vitamin Bs yet. So this was the very beginning of nutrition science. And this was for school. And notice the uniforms. These are students. And what they would do is they would take the classes at college, and then in the summer go out and teach the communities. They also, this is with the education, they created curriculum for K to 12 and sent it to every teacher in the country so they could teach their lessons. Trying to think of anything else here. Okay. They also had a promise that little kids could sign and say they were going to, participate in the program. I'm telling you, nothing was left untouched here. They got into every aspect of society. And this is actually one that was from the North End. It's from Boston, Massachusetts. And they asked kids to eat oatmeal instead of any, wheat bread in the morning. And you can see they wanted him not to eat cookies and candy. Okay, so here are the posters. These were the two original posters. They're actually numbered, number 1 and number 2. And these were this was the advice. And what I like about the one on the right, number 4, says buy local foods. And I've been asking everybody, if you find the term local foods used earlier in history, please let me know. But I think this is the first time local foods were encouraged. And obviously now we do. So I'll look at some things. Here are the theme of military. It's a militaristic theme. And you can see they're very dour, but they do have color in them. And the one on the left, that keep it coming, you can't see it here, but there are little dabs of light blue in them. And one of the helmets is blue. There's blue in the sky, and some of the wording is in blue. And I kept thinking about the printing, because just adding that little bit of blue made it more expensive, but they did it. Food is ammunition, don't waste it. I think, is that the one I brought? Yeah, that's the one I brought for people to see here. Oh, uh-oh. Come back, come back. Did something happen? Play.
If you can just start your slideshow again.
There we go. Okay. So this was American images. Obviously, Lincoln and Washington were not alive at this time, but they used them as patriotic symbols. And the one in the middle is very much a Thanksgiving theme. So that, appeal to, quote unquote, America. And the color is great, isn't it? That green, I love it. But remember, this was a time of a lot of immigration, and they wanted to get the immigrants on board. So the two on the left, it's the same picture, and they created it in 4 languages. The first time I saw these, I was in Ellis Island, and there were 4 of them. In addition to this one is in English and Yiddish, they also had it in Lithuanian and in Italian. And I had some pictures of the Lithuanian. I couldn't figure out what the language was, but it was Lithuanian. For the Polish immigrants, we have the patriotic hero of the Revolutionary War, saying, I really don't know what it says, but it obviously says he died for our country, you can do your part. And I have no idea who the guy in the top is, but obviously he's from Italy. Communities of color. When I was in California, I saw lots of this. The African-American churches got really involved. And remember, this is after the Civil War, and there were a lot of African-American farmers. So they really wanted to reach out to those farmers. It was still a very segregated message system, but they had it. And there were African-American newspapers, and they were used. So what I've showed you now has only been federal national posters. The states did their own thing. So I just wanted to show you a few of the states that did it. I have no idea why Alabama was pushing Irish potatoes, but maybe I should look into where the immigrants were in. Maybe they had a lot of Irish immigrants in Alabama. I don't know. But these are state ones. And these are some more, and I wanted to point out the Arizona poster, because they wanted you to use the local foods, and they wanted to appeal to the population that was living in Arizona. So there were a lot of Native Americans there. So it says, plant corn, chilies, melons, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, pumpkins, and squash. So that message was not on any of the national posters. It was just for Arizona and obviously the Mexican Americans, the influence. I love this one. Use beans and more beans, food of the rich and the poor. Here's some more. And the one in Connecticut, I put this up here because it says, be patriotic, be economical, be physically fit. That was kind of a new concept that wasn't in any of the national posters. There was an effort to get people to eat more fish because fish feed themselves. And this poster on the right is probably I think, the most beautiful poster. The colors in it are really, they're gorgeous. And the one on the left, it's actually a Canadian poster, but I put it in there because I love seeing the butcher pushing fish and not the T-bone steak that was behind him. This did it again. I'm sorry about this. I don't know why.
Just keeps
Yeah.
jumping out of the slideshow for some reason.
Yeah, here we go. All right, and here's Matt. You didn't think I was going to leave Massachusetts out of this. Now remember what was happening. Women's suffrage was happening at the exact same time. So take a look at the image that was on the Massachusetts poster. A woman with her fist in the air, marching with the army, and on her skirt it says house manager. The other interesting thing about this is that she's a Gibson girl. I don't know if anybody knows what a Gibson girl is, but in that time, women of means were encouraged to wear their long hair on top of their head, not curled, but just kind of arranged on their head. And so Gibson actually created a advertising symbol of the Gibson girls, and they're all over advertising from this time. And he used the Gibson girl in this poster. So I found this one, I think, in Alston, in a little antique store. It was when I found some of these, it was like it made my day, made my week, made my month. I mean, I was just so excited to find these. The restaurants were also, had their own cards that they could put up, they could send in to have a little poster in their windows. And there's the fat cat eating his meat and being guilted into helping, not to eat his meat because his wife was working at home. Eat less meat was a major thing. And you can see here it says fry less, and that was because of the lard. They wanted homes to bake, boil, and broil. But you can see they used a lot of imagery that was kind of a little scary, starving children, starving mothers. If you can read the one on the left, it says, one reason for food conservation, Americans, we must come to know the stern realities before it's too late. Eat 1 less ounce of meat a day and study this picture, and you will agree. Instead of wheat, they wanted you to eat corn. Corn could not be sent overseas for 2 reasons. One, Europeans don't eat corn. Corn is for animals. So cornbread in Europe. In fact, I found this letter in California, and it said, why should we have to eat cornbread? Make those French women eat cornbread. But we do have a lot of corn. And this is also a beautiful poster. The bright purple is great. And corn syrup, corn grits, that kind of thing was promoted. And on the left, you can see some of the recipes. They use barley flour in the recipes. I've also seen recipes for bread that uses 3/4 wheat flour, 1/2 wheat flour, 1/4 wheat, no, 1/2, 3/4, and no wheat flour. So they had recipes if you wanted to get yourself into it slowly. They wanted you to save a loaf a week, and that was the Kansas food poster. Now, Kansas is the heart of wheat country, so they were explaining what to do, and the women in St. Louis were demonstrating in a parade about wheat. Food companies got involved. It's kind of funny. Campbell's Soup got involved because that's a good way to stretch food and to use vegetables instead and use less meat. The middle is Cracker Jacks, which was very popular then, and they said you should use it instead of salted nuts. I don't know what was bad about salted nuts, but also in a base ingredient for cookies and cakes. And I did see one about pie. So pie crust, they wanted you to push down the Cracker Jacks and bake your pies that way. And gold medal flour, they were in a funny position, right? Because they had wheat flour, but they actually got into, you can see, you can use Washburn's wartime corn, rye, and barley flour. So they got into the act. And there were war donuts, a recipe for war donuts. Sugar. Don't drink ships. Most of the sugar that was used in the United States was coming either from sugar beets in Europe or from Cuba and other islands. And they needed the ships for the war effort. And so they wanted people not to use sugar, so they could use the ship. So you can see that was, if you drink the sugar, you're taking up the ship. The message was to reduce and use corn syrup. At the beginning of our entry into the war, they did not ration the sugar, but a year in, they started rationing the sugar, and food companies were given 80% of what they had the year before, and households had to stand in line to get sugar certificates and then go to the grocer and get their sugar. And it went down from 3 pounds a person per week to 2. Not a week, a month, I'm sorry. So here's, I guess Louisiana was big in molasses, so they were really pushing Louisiana molasses and sugar cane syrup. This is not the high fructose corn syrup that you know. It's real corn syrup. And remember, the corn kernel, I didn't tell you the second reason why they couldn't send corn. The corn kernel has a lot of oil in it, the kernel of the corn, and it would go bad on the way over in the boat, so they couldn't send the corn. But they could keep the corn, and they tried to get people to use the fat and the sweetener.
The kernels probably would be kind of rancid as well.
Yes, yeah. Today we do a lot of food education, getting people to think their drink and to identify how much sugar is actually in drinks. So it's the exact same message there, that the sodas at the soda fountain had a lot of sugar, so drink less sweetened beverages. Exactly what we tell people today. And there were lots of great cartoons related to sugar. I love this one where they're turning grandma into a tree and asking you to, use your fruit trees for sugar. So was it a successful campaign? Absolutely. Almost 34 million pounds of food was sent over. I always laugh at these statistics, because how did they know that 307, not 6 pounds? I mean, they work the numbers, but it was, I like to say it's about almost 34 million pounds of food. Herbert Hoover, once again, was sent back to Europe the day after the armistice, and he led people through the Reconstruction period, because remember, people were still starving in Europe. So he was the organizer of getting food to people. So he left right after it, and the U.S. Food Administration was formally dissolved in June 1920. So I'm going to leave you with the slide I showed you at the beginning, to think about not wasting our food. And you can see here that this, actually I thought this was going to come from USDA, but it actually came from EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, because of global warming, and they want people not to waste food. So that's what I have for you. I have a question here, I'll repeat it, yeah?
So it's a little bit off topic because it's current, but is my composter in the backyard a source of methane?
I think so. I don't know. That's not my area, but I'm going to think.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does make sense. But you are using that, again, you're preserving the quality of the soil.
And one other question, if I may. I came in late. Is your focus exclusively in food-related posters and so on?
Yes. And there were many other posters, and I can show you the book with other ones in it, but posters was the medium to get the word out, because well, think about it, 1917, how are you going to reach households?
Sure.
Right? So, and actually, I had a history professor over for dinner, and he saw one of my posters, and his comment was that this was probably the first segmentation of populations and for advertising. Now we have, for African American 16-year-olds, it will create an advertisement for them. But this is the first time it happened, identifying different populations in the United States.
We got someone online just requesting if you could repeat the question so they can.
Yeah, the question was, if anybody knows the answer, please tell me. The question that he asked was about, is the compost emitting methane? And I can answer that because I can ask my son, and he'll know the answer to that. So I'll take your email and I'll get back to you. Excuse me?
The answer is
Yes,
yes.
it is creating. Okay. Was there a question? And yeah.
One thing you didn't mention is, wasn't it also, my understanding was that all the U.S. post offices and even jails and everywhere, they got these, and then they'd get a poster and then they'd take that one down and they'd get another poster, because they were churning.
The posters, there was millions printed. The question was about, were post office and jails, did they have posters? The answer is yes. Post offices, because people went to post offices, they were a place where the citizens would go, and they really wanted to put the posters there. And I think I have a photograph I can show you in New Bedford. I don't know if it's town hall or a post office, but they had a big banner up in front of it. Yes.
You mentioned centralized and decentralized
Yep.
in terms of the federal government and the states. Were there some states that participated more actively than others?
The question is, were there some states that participated more than others? I don't know that, but remember, we were still an agrarian country at that time, and so it affected growers and farmers. So I can't think of a state who wouldn't be, at that time, be involved. But there was a state administrator in every single state.
And they all had the same mandates.
Yes, they all had the same. The message was clear, but then they could do what those state posters had local messages. And obviously the messages in New York, they'd create some messages for New York City where all the immigrants were. And then they would create ones for the farmers in upstate New York. So, do you think we could do it again?
We need posters today.
We need posters today. Yeah, I just think of, we could, if the government wanted to do it, they could do it. I think they have a few other things they're thinking of right now, but it's really an interesting campaign. I really believe that the public libraries, I love my library. I guess I'm in a library. I'm not just saying that just because we're in a library. But if you think about a community organizing effort, libraries are in every little town. And we have a cabin on a lake, and the town next to us has the most gorgeous library. It's a rural town, but it's a Carnegie library. So thank you, Andrew Carnegie. Yes?
I just don't know, have the level of engagement now in terms of getting involved in the food system.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't see that, I think.
Well, there are people. There's a lot more. I retired 3.5 years ago, and there's so much more happening now than there ever was. And the young people, the college-age students, they're into this. I mean, it's, global warming is their issue. They're scared, and I don't blame them. But this is something that individuals can do, families can do. And you see a real increase in gardens, right? Home gardens, people growing their own food. The whole thing about farmers markets, it's not recent, but it's relatively recent. So, bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed it. If anybody wants any references, I did bring 2 books that were written about this, if you'd like to see it. I have, the book that's on the front table is actually a librarian from the North End who worked with Italian and Jewish immigrant girls. And she became the head librarian. And that was her autobiography. So I read that.
So we can zoom pretty close with the cameras. Do you want to sort of maybe
Sure.
set up a little station with
No,
the
I'd rather-
posters you brought and
yeah.
the books and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I
And
want-
we can show the
I
folks
just want to
online.
show the two books that I use the most. This one is from Charles Pack about the war gardens. And this one is about the Food Administration, which I read carefully in a lot of this information.
You got it.
I got it?
Yes.
So these books were actually canceled from libraries, and I was able to purchase them. Also, all of the pamphlets have been reproduced, and they're interesting, but they're very dense, really, really dense. You had to have a pretty high level of education, I think, to read them. The other thing I brought I wanted to just show you the shape of this. This is a trolley card. So this is only for urban people, obviously, who took the trolley. And I don't know if you remember one of the first photos I showed you, but this is the graphic from there. So it's very cool, I think.
They're wonderful.
Yeah. And by the way, I know you said you collected World War II posters. That's
No,
a,
I have two.
oh, you have two.
Yeah.
But World War II I have a couple of World War II because I couldn't resist them, but they are equally as interesting and about gardens and home canning, et cetera.
Necessarily as colorful as
No, these are really,
World War I.
these are incredible.
And a lot of World War I had some of the best illustrators in the United States.
Yes, the comment was that some of the best illustrators in the United States were used in creating the posters, and that's very true. That was they were encouraged, the illustrators were encouraged to spend time volunteering, and they did the posters and made them really beautiful. And I know that the New York Graphic Society did it a lot. Remember that at that time, everything was illustrated, right? So it led to it. I think I'm going to stop. Is that okay? Because we're over time. I don't want to keep people if they want to go.
Do you
But
mind, can we just maybe show the folks at home this big?
oh,
picture?
sure.
I'll get it for you. I'll get it.
And how many do you have?
The question was, how many posters do I have? And I can hear my family laughing. Probably about 50 of different sizes. So there are small ones, and then there are big ones. Okay. Yep. This is one of the posters. And nutrition and food education, we are always trying to get people to realize the power of food. So this is really quite an image and quite a lesson.
Just to be off point.
Well, let me just hold on one second. Lara, do you want to stop the show?
Yeah, and do you have any additional questions, or I'll thank our audience?
Okay, is this related to it?
Do you
Okay.
have any sense of what impact it had on literacy?
Good question. What was the impact on literacy? I don't know, but they certainly, I think anytime the eye is drawn to something and it has a simple message, it helps in literacy. But you could see that for the immigrants, they translated it into their languages. So you should, if you ever get to Ellis Island, you can see those 4 posters. They're kind of cool. And I probably should thank my husband, who did all the framing. He didn't do the framing, but he had them all framed, and they're very colorful. And my entire house is. And you're welcome to come if you'd like to see them. But it's really great. I really like it. So, all right. Well, thank you for coming, and I appreciate people. Thank you.
Great, may I borrow your mic?
Sure.
Thank you so much. All right. Thank you so much, Professor Schwartz, for sharing all of these beautiful posters with us tonight and your knowledge about the context there. Thank you, all of you here in the audience, for joining us tonight. Thank you at home for joining us. We hope to see you on October 5th at 7 p.m., both in person and online, for Dr. Liz Fideler talking about her new book. And she will also be signing and selling copies of her book here at the library. So that's another benefit of coming in person. Cultivating that common ground, and it's Blanche Ames and Oaks Ames. They're local figures here in Framingham. All right, so thank you again so much, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Lara, for your assistance.
I knew she was speaking.